So how much longer will you and I be happy with the status quo that exists? A status quo that over the past 100 years continues to put you and I as African people at the recipients of all forces shaping the global world. So if I asked you a question, what's happened in the world over the past few years that we've done that's shaped the rest of it? How many of us here would answer in the affirmative and give an example? And the truth is, it's because of the narrative and conversations that we've had. We've had a conversation that makes it okay for Africans to just be okay. And a part of that conversation, we see it in my environment where we finance businesses, is there's this huge thing now about small businesses. Like, just start a business and just get in it. It's okay if it's a small business. Well, I'm here to tell you something new, and that is, it's not okay. So in my own country, South Africa, we have these things called kotas. By the way, kotas are an institution. And here's how it works. You take a loaf of bread, you cut it in half, and then you cut what's left in half, and you're left with a quarter of the bread, hence kota. What you then do is you remove the center piece of it, which is the soft bread, and inside you put in whatever you like. So the innards could be French fries, it could be sausages with a bit of ketchup, and you overlay it with a soft part and you eat it. And please understand, it does something to the soul that a McDonald's burger will never do. It is perhaps our greatest export, except here's the thing, we're not exporting it. So here are two businesses. Thibault's Kotas operates in Alexander, run by an interesting entrepreneur. He started his business in the year 2005. He turned over 53,000 Rand for the year last year. Interestingly, there is a listed South African company which started a franchise called Kota Joe. And they pumped in a bit of capital. They started in 2013, 8 years after Thibault's, doing the same thing he does. And last year they did 20 million Rand in turnover. My point, we are big business. So maybe this is an anomaly, right? Here's a question. What's a bank? A bank, ladies and gentlemen, is nothing more than a collective investment scheme. We all come together, we put our money in the central pot, we put it there usually as savings, with the idea that when you unlock that money and you need it future, you can get it. What the bank does is it takes that money and it says to people, if you're credit worthy, we'll lend you the money and we'll price it at a premium. Hence your ability to buy a car or a house. In South Africa, we have these advents of things called stokvels. It's usually a group of black women who come together, they put money in a pot, and at the end of the year, they have money and they go to the ShopRite and then they buy stuff. And then the next year, the cycle starts again, right? So here's an interesting stokvel called Siyanqoba. They operate in the Eastern Cape. Started a year after we achieved our democracy in 95. Last year, their collective investment, 300,000. Now, if you bundle together 300,000 over the past 20 years, you can do the math about the kind of numbers we're talking that they cumulatively over the past 20 years have put in the same place. In 1991, 4 years before them, a bank was formed in South Africa known as Absa, which does, in essence, the same thing. The stokvel, last year 300,000. Absa is a 4.6 billion Rand a year turnover business. My point, our models of doing business are big business. You and I need to unlock our thinking. It's not okay for us to start small businesses. It's not okay for us to be happy to be vendors on the side of the road anymore, selling fruits and vegetables. What we need to do is own the place that produces the fruit, own the road infrastructure that moves the fruit, own the retail infrastructure that sells the fruit, and own the banking system that transacts the whole platform. And by the way, why don't we just take the taxes as well? So the idea here is we need a radically new form of thinking. Now that we're clear on this, let me explain to you why we're not doing it. Because we could blame colonialism and in my country apartheid as long as we want, but there is a deeper problem. And the deeper problem is our inability to understand the ecosystem and life cycle of entrepreneurship. All entrepreneurs start out as startups. Whether you're Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, you start out as a one-man show with an idea. What makes the Americans and now more recently the Asians really good is they've created a huge pool of venture capital money. Easy to access, cheap, and you can have it as patient money. You can have it forever and never have to pay it back. That's why they're building large institutions. So it's not a mistake that Xiaomi, a Chinese mobile company started 5 years ago, is now the third largest smartphone company in the world. Where do they sell their phones? 87% of their sales comes from China, the remainder from this continent. We are big business. We all start out as startups. How do you know you're a startup? It's easy. You're one guy. You go to the customer, you deal with him, you go back, you make the cookies, then you come back and you give him the cookies. And then month end you phone him and say, can I please have my money? And then he pays you. And if he doesn't, you go to him and say, please, I'm going to club you until I get my money. And usually you give him what I like to call an AAK, an attitude adjustment clap. But how do you know you're a startup? It's easy. If you are the value in the business, you're a startup. If the customer wouldn't trade with your business unless you were in it, you're a startup. Move a level above that, you become what I see a lot of happening now in the rest of the continent. So for a bit of context, I run a VC fund. And in our VC fund, we own an advisory business where we advise entrepreneurs how to start businesses, an enterprise development businesses where we help them get into the supply chains of large organizations, and then a fund where we actually finance them. So the entire ecosystem they need to succeed. We're in 6 countries in the continent, so Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, and Western Africa. I like to call us what we are, the best kept secret in this continent. Nobody knows about us, and I like it that way, because then they can't see us coming. So we see a lot of them start up as startups, and then they become these survivalist entrepreneurs. The problem is a lot of them die at the instance at which they become survivalists. What are survivalists? I really need money month end to pay my bills. And how do you know you are one? It's usually one person with 3, maybe 4 people in his team. He's operating in a small office and he's just barely making it. And every month he must make money to pay for that month's bills. Level above that is you then become success, right? And a success, you're one guy, you have a core group of people who manage people, and then a core group of people who deliver the work. And then where we should be, at growth level. Here's the question. How do we move from startup to growth in as fast as time as possible, minimize the risk, and develop our own industries? The mindset has to change. Perhaps the deepest thing about this is this. It's not complex. Entrepreneurs need 6 things to succeed. Just 6. Just 6. You need an infrastructure. And what's the challenge we have in our continent? If I manufacture something in Joburg, South Africa, how do I get it to Makoko in Nigeria? How do I get it to Luanda in Angola? It still persists in our own continent that I can't put it on a single rail track and move it to that part of the world. So we need an infrastructure that opens up our markets. We need capital, money, funding. And dear governments, here's the point. The money doesn't have to be cheap, but it does have to be patient. It's not okay anymore that when entrepreneurs fail in our continent, we bank them. And after that, we then put them on these things called blacklists and they can't access credit anymore. Because what you've done is you've taken somebody who's failed and learned from failing, and you've now made him that he can't operate economically for the next 5 years. So they need assets, they need access to markets, strong administration, and then people. And here's the thing about the people challenge. What is the first thing top talent does in Africa? Leaves. Think about it. If you think about the top Africans shaping the rest of the world today, they're not lightly doing it in our own continent. They're somewhere else doing it. And a part of the narrative we need to reshape is how do we bring them back here to build what is jointly ours? There is a huge, massive knowledge in the African diaspora. We need to bring them back in here. And this is how we reshape it. So, there's really 4 reasons people start businesses. 4. To live well, to leave something for your kids, to sell it, or to change the world. That's it. So what does Google say? Google says we exist to do no harm. Apple says because the people who are brave enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. So they live on a philosophy space where it really is about changing the world, and the reward is much, much higher. Here, we live lifestyles. We get access to public sector opportunities. We call them tenders. And here's the thing about a tender. Once you get it, people must know. So the first paycheck goes to getting you that Ferrari, and because we don't have Ferrari dealerships, what do? We import them in. And not only that, I must then be seen to live in a certain suburb. So what we do is we encumber our ability and opportunity purely by wanting to live a fancy lifestyle. The Asian people are different, specifically Indians. You see a lot of this in my country. They build legacy businesses. The great-grandfather gets a corner shop and he opens up a dry cleaner. His son, the father, opens up a fast food joint. His son, you, opens up a hardware store. And your son will then open up something else. But here's the thing, generation on generation on generation, they don't close these shops down. They keep them running in the family as legacy businesses. The environment I work in is where we sell businesses. We build them purely for the purpose of selling them. Why? Because if you build to sell, you build for value. It means you're going to live scrappy, you're going to keep costs low, you're going to take a long-term view because you're building this thing genuinely to create enough push pressure in the market that you can sell it. I was on Dragon's Den in South Africa. So I invested in, myself and the other dragons actually, invested in a business that is fundamentally shaping the entire floral market in the world. Not just here, but in the world. They've created an Uber, but for flowers. So imagine a situation where you would go on your phone and you wanted to get flowers for your loved one. And when you pull up the application on your screen, it would show you the local florist and what that local florist has available right now and the price. You would then buy from that local florist, he would receive the order and deliver the goods in a split second of a time. Why? Because he's closer to you. Does it work? Of course it does.